Oh man, this is like one of those abstract paintings. It like represents I know, losing your fucking mind. I just kind of want to dick around today and go through most of Nintendo's mainline controllers throughout history and just kind of discuss, you know, which ones I like, which ones I don't, the pros and cons of everything. Because when it comes to controllers, Nintendo is simultaneously the mastermind behind some of the best controller designs of all time and the mastermind that you want to stay the fuck away from as much as possible. Because let's be honest, you know, Nintendo is all about just doing something new every time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's the Nintendo 64 controller. But Nintendo's controller designs are kind of indicative of how I feel as the company as a whole. Yeah, it's bad shit insane and they do some dumb shit sometimes, but like, I would not want to follow any other company as much as I do with Nintendo because like, what the fuck is going on here? This is just so much fun. Yes, you can look at, you know, the Xbox controllers throughout the years, and for the most part, you know, they all look very similar. And because of that, you know, they have a consistent line of quality. The original Xbox controllers weren't the greatest, but hey, Xbox 360 was like the standard to meet. And then Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S, like, those controllers are pretty good. PlayStation was as consistent could be for a bit there. Pretty much a PS3 controller looked exactly like a PS1 controller. And then we got, you know, the DualShock 4 and the DualSense with the PS5. But overall, you know, Sony's controllers have also been wildly consistent throughout the years. But that's just kind of boring in comparison to what the hell's going on here. Like, yeah, what the hell is going on here? Here we go. Let's start with the NES gamepad. This is, you know, as iconic could be. I mean, just like the simple design right here. I mean, like, it's classic, it's timeless. I always found so many elements of this design to just like literally like rot in my brain for years. So I had an NES at my grandma's house. It was my cousin's, and he just left it there. So I got my fair share of time on this controller. And as a kid, I mean, you just click instantly with this gamepad. I mean, just like small things that just kind of like, you know, linger for you. The fact that it's like you have this different texture on the, you know, the black part, the badass looking font, and the very significant red B and A buttons. Every button on this controller, as few as there are, feel significant. This controller nowadays is incredibly safe. Like, you know, you can definitely make do with it. There's nothing that's inherently like super wrong with it. It's mostly just a bunch of nitpicks that add up to it being like obviously inadequate to use these days, even for old NES games. For one, the controller design is pretty small. Something I didn't think about for the longest time because, you know, when I would play an NES game, you know, I was a kid. And over the years, you know, I didn't think much about it. But nowadays, when I try to hold it, like, yeah, it's a pretty small controller. And the fact that it has like these razor sharp edges everywhere, not only with the controller design itself, but with the D-pad, man. This is a sharp-ass D-pad. The A and B buttons here are pretty good. And, you know, the start and select buttons are a nice rubbery kind of feel. The D-pad itself, like, yeah, this thing can hurt after a while of rocking back and forth on it. And there's not really a comfortable way to hold this for a while because, like, yeah, it's gonna dig into your hands with its sharp edges. With that being said, the NES controller does what it does well. It introduced the D-pad to the masses, and overall, it pretty much solidified what video game controllers would be like for years to come. To be perfectly fair, a lot of video game controllers prior to this, you could trace the modern controller design back to them, but, you know, it was the NES controller that really made modern control styles popular. But it was the SNES controller to actually make you take it goddamn seriously. So this feels like a completely refined NES controller. It maintains a lot of the same things like, you know, the rubber start and select buttons and, you know, D-pad over here, buttons over here, but it adds buttons where necessary. So we have the shoulder buttons, the diamond face button configuration, and a lot of elements have been softened out. For one, the overall design is just a much more comfortable, rounded dog bone-like shape. And then the D-pad is not nearly as sharp. This is a much softer, yet still very good D-pad. It's really hard to hate on the Super Nintendo controller. Many people have considered this to be the best controller of all time, and I think that's mainly because for a while there, a lot of video game commentary online has kind of been like led by people who grew up with the Super Nintendo. And you know, the SNES is a phenomenal console, but at the same time, like, Is this really the best controller ever? Come on, no. Once again, it is a bit small by today's standards. And of course, you are lacking a lot of features that controllers that followed this one up have included. Of course, how can I really blame this controller? A lot of those features weren't really mainstays, but man, a lot of games on the Super Nintendo would have definitely benefited from something like an analog stick. So of course, Nintendo answered my prayers. I learned to keep my fucking mouth shut. Okay, it's really fun to make fun of the Nintendo 64 controller because, you know, what the hell is going on here? But I'm not gonna sit here and act like it's this abhorrent controller design. It's just kind of funky. There is an interesting concept here where because there are 3 prongs, there are multiple ways to hold this and play different games. So you can hold it like this, you can hold it like this, you can hold it like this. But in the end, I don't really feel like any game truly took advantage of this feature. You know, like, obviously, it makes more sense to have something like this design right here, where if you want to make a game where you're using the D-pad and face buttons, you can also use the analog stick if you want to. You can't really do that on the N64. And I'm willing to cut them some slack since this was the first time a controller like this has really been done, but at the same time, like, Sony figured this out within the first year of Nintendo putting this controller out on the market. So N64 launched in 1996, Sony launched the DualShock for the PS1 in 1997. And it's just like, just the fact that they figured it out within a year, like, I'm like, come on, bro, seriously? You thought this was better than just putting the analog stick, like, here, and then putting, like, the D-pad slightly down to the side? I don't know. I mean, like, it does make for an iconic controller layout and design, and it does work. I can't deny that. Holding the controller like this, you know, hey, this does the job. Now, with that being said, while the thumbstick on the N64 controller is its claim to fame, it's also like the worst part of the entire thing. This is just a gross feeling stick overall. Every time I'm using it, it feels like it's about to just slip off my thumb or it's grinding up against the plastic. Of course, you can do a lot to mitigate this. You can swap the thumbsticks from an N64 out for like a GameCube controller's thumbstick, for example. But it's still like, I'm talking about these controllers as is, and these controllers as is, the thumbstick is the worst part of this thing. But with this controller design, it's kind of interesting to see what they retained from the previous with the Super Nintendo. You know, you have the 4 face buttons, but they use them as the C buttons here, which, you know, eventually would become something like the C stick, and these are primarily used for camera control. But then, you know, when it comes to regular face buttons like B and A, we only have 2 of those again, like with the NES. But yeah, you can use the C buttons as like a standard button configuration like on a Super Nintendo controller here. So, you know, you can still do that, and many N64 games still use like the C buttons as regular buttons, not necessarily camera buttons, but still, it's a little strange to go from, you know, the Super Nintendo to this. Where, you know, we do have more buttons, but these are more so kind of like specifically for camera control, at least how, you know, it feels like they're designed. And then no select button, just a start button. I don't know, it's just a little strange. It's just something that's like, okay, you know, so we just don't have that anymore. I wonder why. To be fair, the select button always kind of felt like, I don't know, you know, like, what are we doing here? And that little doodad was retained on the GameCube controller. Just a start button, no select, because it don't need it. The GameCube controller is perfect. This right here is the Wavebird variant of the GameCube controller, which I always thought was kind of a weird thing to call the wireless GameCube controller, because it almost felt like a third-party, just not official thing, you know, like how like you have like the Mad Catz controllers and whatnot. Like the term Wavebird felt like that, like it was like one of those. Nintendo kind of had that problem this generation for me. Like there was the GBA's e-reader that didn't really feel like it was a Nintendo official accessory, to me at least. And then you have the Wavebird, so like a lot of weird stuff this generation. But hey, the Wavebird introduced a truly wireless controller that worked. We've had wireless controllers before, you know, with the Atari 2600, the Sega Genesis. Those are ones that I specifically remember. But those used IR, which meant, you know, you had to point the IR sensor of the controller to the sensor plugged into the console. It made it so then, like, if you kind of, you know, pointed it slightly away, it wasn't gonna work. The Wavebird used radio waves, and that made things like way better. You know, it's just kind of lame though. You have to line up the number on the controller to the number on the adapter in the console, and for some reason they made this like the smallest dial possible where you can barely see the number. It's ridiculous. But what can I say about the GameCube controller? All right, you know, like I love this stinking thing. Again, it's not perfect. There's a lot of like weird things about it. The D-pad, I mean, like, it's a functional D-pad. It works good. It's just a little too small. It just feels like, you know, what's the point? They don't have the diamond button configuration anymore. Instead, like this jelly belly ass bullshit. And it's fine. In fact, I think this layout is really cool in many ways. You have your significant button right here, and then everything else around it. So then, you know, if you have a game where, hey, you're going to be doing like this one thing a lot, like, hey, A is the shoot button. That's what you're doing. Boom, boom, boom. You know, it makes a lot of sense to have like, hey, this is your primary button. These are your sub buttons. But at the same time, like, I think the standard diamond makes a lot more sense for like all games. The fact that it only has like the Z button up here and then nothing over here, like, that's just kind of weird. But when you wrap your hands around this controller, everything is just in the right spot, to the point where it's just like, there's no other way this can feel much better outside of like small little nitpicks here and there. This just feels natural. I think that's the best way to describe the GameCube controller. Everything about it just feels natural. Well, you go from like the most natural feeling controller of all time to a fucking stick. The Wii Remote was a definite direction for Nintendo to go in. You see, the GameCube and N64 didn't do as well as the previous consoles, and also were severely getting outperformed by the competition at the time. It was obvious that Nintendo couldn't really like just do what Xbox and PlayStation were doing with like, hey, let's just try to make a standard great game console. They had to do something a little funky. And honestly, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, Nintendo's games have so much unique, wacky character to them that honestly, their game consoles and controllers deserve to kind of represent that genuine, wacky, creative side of Nintendo. The GameCube, as much as I love that damn thing, it, you know, like, it kind of scratches that surface. You know, it's a fucking cube. But putting Nintendo in a box and just making it be like, okay, we're selling basic hardware to play our games on, like, no, like, they got to do some weird garbage. It's just how they are. As much as people didn't like the Wii at the time, because, you know, hey, again, you know, a lot of the people that were headlining the gaming talk were, you know, grew up around this era. So it's just like when Nintendo was putting out Wii Music, they were like, this is bullshit. What happened to Nintendo? They're not doing what Nintendo used to do. It's just like, come on, guys. Like, the Wii is pretty much as Nintendo could get in many ways. They started life as a toy company. They made the wackiest garbage I've ever seen. So yeah, this makes sense for Nintendo. I think this is very much in line with Nintendo. You want to know why it's very much in line with Nintendo? It's a mixed bag. I like the Wii Remote to an extent, but it's not perfect, much like all these other controllers. You know, when I'm holding it like this, you know, it feels fine. I think the fact that you have this whole battery compartment here, you know, gives you something to hold on to. You hold it like a TV remote, and of course, it includes motion controls and an IR pointer, so then you can point and select things by just moving it around. And that's kind of the star of the show with the Wii. Back in the day, you know, the motion controls, you know, swinging it around to hit a tennis ball, that's kind of what was like, oh man, that's the bread and butter of the Wii. But now when we're looking back and we see like, hey, what did the Wii do really well? What the Wii did really well at was the pointer functionality. That's something that, like, it did better than anything else. Nowadays, we have gyro functionality in a lot of our controllers, which allow us to kind of mimic what the Wii could do with this. But gyro functionality it desyncs a lot. It's not as good. Sure, the sensor bar requires you to be pointing at it all the time, but, like, you know, it doesn't desync as much as a damn Joy-Con does. That thing is horrible. So that element is great. The motion controls are, you know, they're kind of hit or miss. Obviously, with Wii Sports, like, they're great. It works very well in that game. But then you have, like, all the other games that followed Wii Sports where they're just trying to milk the Wii Sports success. doesn't work nearly as well. A lot of people think that, the waggling aspect of the Wii Remote is just kind of, lame as hell. Instead of button mashing, you gotta waggle your Wii Remote. But I'm kind of like, you know what? That adds a different layer to these games. Waggling is a different sensation and it requires a different set of skills compared to mashing buttons constantly. It represents something different in game. I think it's a valid controller input. It's still a little dumb, but I think it's valid. It has its place. But you know what? The Wii Remote is one of the most versatile controllers out there. At least at the time it was. I mean, Nintendo would put out all these different add-ons for it where they were pretty much just plastic shells, but you just pop your Wii Remote in it and bam, it's a wheel. Bam, it's a gun. That was all kind of a special element of this controller because at the time we had nothing else really like it. So in addition to, oh man, I'm able to actually play sports with this thing. This is incredible. Then you could just pop it in something else and it's like, wow, I'm driving. And I think what was really cool about it was the fact that, yeah, you could put it on its side and use it as a standard controller. Aha! As we can see here, Nintendo kind of brought back the NES design in a bit of a sneaky way with the Wii Remote. That was always kind of cute, especially when you would buy NES games on the Wii Shop channel, and hey, I can just play them with the Wii Remote on its side. With that being said, I'm not a huge fan of using the Wii Remote like this. The D-pad isn't my favorite in the world. Once again, it's a little small, and it's also kind of sharp. Definitely way sharper than like the GameCubes or the SNES's D-pads. And the buttons here just don't feel as like cool as like the NES controller. And just certain things are in awkward places if you're gonna be playing like this. Like, the B button down here, the start and select buttons are a little weird to reach to. And I think one of the biggest problems with the Wii Remote is the fact that a lot of functionality is locked behind plugging in a separate controller. To get just a single analog stick, we gotta plug the nunchuk in here. This thing is lame. Holding the Wii Remote and nunchuk at the same time is perfectly fine, like it's a fine experience. But my God, just all this incredibly light design, like, so this feels like nothing when you hold it compared to the Wii Remote. So it's just like, even when I'm playing like boxing in Wii Sports and you have to like, use this to punch and use this to punch, it feels wrong to punch with this one. I feel like I'm not gonna get anything done with this controller. But the fact that the analog stick was locked behind this thing and it has, 2 extra buttons, I don't know. It's a little lame, and it kind of limits what a lot of Wii games could really do, I think. Skyward Sword on the Wii didn't have camera control, and I think that's because you only have one analog stick. I feel like it would have made more sense to have an analog stick on the Wii Remote. Hey, you're lacking a D-pad, that kind of stinks, but it's also like, I think an analog stick is a little more useful in the era of the Wii than a D-pad was. And yeah, if you have to use an analog stick to control a 2D game, that's a little lame, but it's still like, I don't know. I just feel like it would have made the Wii Remote on its own a bit more versatile than it is right now. The Wii Remote is definitely one of the more controversial Nintendo controllers. I think if SNES and GameCube is some of their best, then Wii Remote is definitely more on the N64 side of things, where some people love it, some people hate it. I'm a little mixed. I'm never like frothing at the mouth to use this controller. I think this controller works great in games like, Wii Sports. I think Mario Galaxy works wonderfully with it. But for the most part, honestly, a lot of my favorite games on the Wii feel like they're kind of limited by the Wii Remote, But that doesn't mean it didn't do a lot for gaming. I think it opened up the space to be as popular as it is today. And it's still an incredibly functional controller. It's still very fun to use in games that utilize it well. But that's the main problem. A lot of games don't utilize it very well. But I'd say I'm a bit like lukewarm towards the Wii Remote. It's fine. At least it didn't piss on my lunch. The Wii U gamepad. Ah, yeah. Lunch pisser Wii U gamepad. And by piss on my lunch, I mean tank an entire company for nearly a whole generation of gaming. If the Wii Remote and N64 are more on the controversial side of Nintendo's controllers, I'd say this is the most controversial. And for good reason. I don't really find there to be a lot of passion behind the making of this controller. It genuinely just kind of felt like Nintendo wanted to just evolve from the Wii remote, so you have to do some crazy controller gimmicks, so let's just cram a bunch of garbage in this thing. Oh, tablets are big now? The DS was a success? Oh, well, let's just do all of that on the Wii successor. It'll have motion controls and a camera and NFC and blah! This is a very confused controller, and it is a big reason as to why the Wii U didn't do well. However, this is a very misunderstood controller in my opinion. For me personally, I love how this feels. This feels great. Do I really want to play like every game known to man with the Wii U gamepad? No, but during that generation, I mean, it worked really well for me. I really enjoyed using this thing. Compared to the Wii remote, you can play everything on this. You know, you have all the necessary buttons, which I think is obviously a big upgrade from that controller. And in addition, all the buttons feel really good. The D-pad feels great, the face buttons feel excellent, and they feel substantial. That's my main thing. They feel like everything matters when you're hitting every button. The thumbsticks include a click, which is what most modern controllers did at the time. So, you know, Nintendo finally got with the times there. And the motion controls in this controller, because there is a gyroscope, actually work really well. In a game like Splatoon, like, I barely ever felt like I had to resync my controller or recalibrate or anything like that. Of course, we have a giant-ass touchscreen in the middle. Oh, I didn't notice. This is kind of the main point of the Wii U gamepad, and it's probably like the lamest part, honestly, overall. I mean, I love the feel of this. I think it feels great. The grips on the back, lovely. This is a very comfortable controller for what it is. Now, do I really prefer this to a standard controller design? You know, probably not. I can't really say I'm ever really thinking like, damn, I really need a standard controller design when I'm, you know, using this. But I'm never thinking, damn, do I want to play with that slate tablet when I'm, you know, using a standard controller like this? So, you know, I think, you know, I wouldn't prefer it, but it is very nice. I think they did a good job with the ergonomics on this controller. But the screen is just, it's never used, man. Like, when it's used, it's just unnecessary, or it's intrusive, and it's just lame as hell. And you know what really sucks? It's not even a good touch screen. No multi-touch, so you can't do anything like that. No, you have to touch with only one finger, or use the old stylus here, buddy. And during the Nintendo DS era, fine. Even during the 3DS, you know, the 3DS launched in 2011, but it's just like the touchscreen wasn't a big factor on that system. It wasn't like the main selling point, so it's just like, whatever. By 2012, when a regular-ass DS-style touchscreen is what's on your latest and greatest video game console for $300, $350, like, that's ridiculous. I think around that time, Google launched the Nexus 7 tablet for like $200, and that was like a full-fledged tablet. And it's just like, why the hell am I just making do with fucking breadcrumbs over here? And outdated breadcrumbs at that. And this screen really tanks a lot of the controller. The battery life on this thing, lame as hell. Like 3 to 5 hours. And even then, like, my batteries are definitely like shot. I can probably get like 2 out of this thing. All this other garbage they included is it's just unnecessary. When you look at what games utilized it all, like, it's not worth it. Most of the games you'd want a Wii U for are like pretty traditional games. It's like Donkey Kong Country, Mario 3D World, New Super Mario Brothers, Smash Brothers, Mario Kart. And like for all those games, how much of those are you actually using like any of these damn features with? This port was never even used. But with that being said, there are some times where this screen does come into play and it does make for a much better like gaming experience, or like a very unique gaming experience. You know, Nintendo Land is a fantastic multiplayer game. Game & Wario has some fun stuff in it. Super Mario Maker like peaked on Wii U in terms of making a level with your controller. Like Mario Maker 2 is great, but like making a level in that game is not nearly as fun and intuitive as it is on the Wii U. Like there are uses for this thing, and when it's useful, like it kind of starts to click. You're like, man, like imagine if this thing actually was like utilized to its fullest potential. That would have been amazing. But the problem was nobody wanted to invest that much time into the Wii U, and it felt like a lot of the ideas people had with the gamepad, they were kind of half-baked. And like when they actually were implemented in the game, like they didn't work well at all. Unfortunately, I think it's safe to say this is probably like one of Nintendo's worst controllers. Not because it's bad, but just because like bro, I do quite like the gamepad. I like using it. I like playing with it. But, you know, comparing what all the other controllers brought to the table, all the positives all the other controllers introduced, this one is kind of at the bottom of the list because everything this controller introduced kind of helped to ruin the Wii U in the long run. Which brings us to these, which were meant to clean up the mess that was the Wii U gamepad. Shitty fucking controllers. The Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. So, these are cute. They truly are kind of an amalgamation of everything Nintendo's done up until this point. You know, like a standard controller design, you know, you have 2 analog sticks, face buttons, a D-pad down here, you know, when it's like this. And it's kind of like a Wii Remote and nunchuk, you know, you also have motion control, so you can do all kinds of Wii Remote nunchuk type things. But then, you can move it to its side here, and it's also like a Wii Remote in that way, but also kind of like a Super Nintendo controller, and, you know, you can play 2-player multiplayer right out of the box, kind of like an NES, because NES's came with 2 controllers out of the box. They're even more versatile than Wii Remotes in this way, you know, they can do all these different things, but of course, a major problem is, because it can do all these different things, it's not amazing at any of them, and there's a lot of problems with the Joy-Con. I appreciate the Joy-Con's concept more than, like, it in practice. Using them never feels ideal to me, you know? Like, my fingers fall asleep all the time when I'm using this, and it's because, like, look, there's no caboose. Compared to the Wii Remote, where you had, like, that substantial battery component to hold onto, these being flat feel more like a way to make the Nintendo Switch look sleek and modern, like an iPad, compared to, you know, actually ergonomically pleasing, like a Wii U gamepad. The buttons all feel fine, but they're kind of like a small, clicky style, which is not my favorite thing in the world. I vastly prefer something like the Wii U gamepad with big, meaty buttons, but they don't have kind of like the tactile click of a Joy-Con. I mean, at the end of the day, they both do the job, but like, damn, I just vastly prefer something like the Wii U gamepad compared to these buttons. The sticks, because this has to be on a portable unit, they don't have a lot of reach, you know, they're very tiny, which does make it so then these can kind of double as D-pads. You know, when I'm playing a 2D game, you know, the Joy-Con thumbstick works pretty well as a D-pad substitute because, you know, God forbid I actually use their D-pad substitute. Yeah, because of the whole rent setup that they have, you know, the D-pad had to be 4 separate buttons to be similar to a set of face buttons. And, yeah, you know, I'm not a big fan of using this as, like, a D-pad. I can't remember the last time that I've actually used this unironically in a 2D platformer type game. I just end up going for the thumbsticks. The triggers are fine. The shoulder buttons are fine. The shoulder buttons when you're in this, you know, 2-player mode, they're fine, but you need the Joy-Con strap to click on to make these shoulder buttons even, like, slightly tolerable. But man, just the fact this is kind of a separate entity, just kind of makes it so then, like, you know, when I'm using a Joy-Con on its side, I just don't really give a damn. I'm just like, yeah, sure, just give me the shitty shoulder buttons, mainly because, like, god damn, these are hard to get off when you get them on. Oh my god, it's like I break the thing every time that happens. I appreciate the Joy-Con more as like a feat of engineering and controller design, just like innovative use of just like multiple ideas, just making a jack of all trades kind of controller. Like, it does that really well. Like, I think it's really good at that. But, you know, it has a lot of similar problems to the Wii U controller, you know? What the f*** are you using that for? IR camera on the bottom? You know, come on. And not only does it have all these design issues, but, like, man, these things kind of break down easier than any other Nintendo controller. Not even, like, halfway through the generation, people were having problems with the thumbsticks on these things wearing out or drifting or whatever. These are not great controllers. I think they're cute and smartly designed, but like when it comes to the execution, I don't know, man. I think these are probably like the worst controllers Nintendo's ever made. That's not to say like I'm like, god damn Nintendo, you really f***ed this up. More so like, hey, great ideas, Nintendo. Let's do better next time, eh? So yeah, those were all of Nintendo's main line controllers. However, obviously, there's a lot more Nintendo controllers. Those just went over everything from NES to Nintendo Switch. But of course, Nintendo had extra controllers, supplemental controllers, controllers for consoles that don't fucking matter. Case in point, the Virtual Boy controller. So for the rest of these controllers, I'm just gonna kind of look at them a little like randomly, you know, and we're not gonna go in any particular order. So starting off with this little bugger, the Virtual Boy. So, you know, the Virtual Boy is kind of like half portable console, half home console, whatever. But hey, it does have a controller like a regular Nintendo home console, and a weird one at that. However, you have to give this controller some credit. It does have like a lot of features of modern controllers. You know, you have the grips down here, 2 D-pads, which, you know, can kind of be a replacement for dual analog sticks, and triggers. You know, not really like you'd expect them these days, but hey, they're there. To be honest, this is a good controller. Everything feels really nice. These D-pads kind of stray away from the typical Nintendo design. You usually have like the standard plus layout with the arrows on there, or during the Wii and Wii U era, you have the D-pad with the lines on each button there. Whereas here, these D-pads kind of encourage you to keep your thumb in the middle and rock it back and forth. If you can see, the ridges around it kind of make it so then you kind of feel like that's what they want you to do. It's honestly a really comfortable D-pad design. I honestly prefer this to a lot of Nintendo's other D-pads. And then the buttons here all feel really nice. The triggers are also in a good spot. This seems like it's a slam dunk of a controller. Problem is, it's for the Virtual Boy. What's weird about this? Well, for one, 2 D-pads is just a little strange considering that, like, barely any game actually uses them. So at that point, I kind of question, like, what did they think these D-pads were gonna do? Maybe because, you know, the Virtual Boy is all about 3D space. Maybe you need, you know, the dual movement. But most of the games they were making for the Virtual Boy were just kind of like games that would work on any platform. So, like, that's a little confusing. I also think it's really, really strange what they did here. The fact that these select, start, B, and A buttons all feel the same. There's nothing distinguishing them, which is kind of tricky while playing the Virtual Boy because it's not very easy to just, you know, look down at the controller like you would with any other home console, because your head's stuck in a giant red dungeon. I mean, yes, you can, you know, remove yourself from it and look down, but it's so much less convenient than just looking down with your peripheral vision. You can't really do that like you could while playing like a Super Nintendo or whatever. But even with a Super Nintendo controller, they have certain indications of which button this is. Y and X are concave, while B and A are convex. Even with the N64, you have the letter B and the letter A etched into the button itself. Like, at the very least, I think that would have gone a long way here. But no, instead, you just have to remember that this is B, this is A, this is select, this is start. It's not that hard to remember, but it just feels like a pretty weird flaw with this controller, because it feels like it's not really made with the intention that you're going to be using it shoving your head into that thing. Also, the power supply for the Virtual Boy, it's connected to the controller, which is just kind of funny. This is a weird controller, but it's not a bad controller. I think this is a solid gamepad. Its main problem is that it's for the fucking Virtual Boy. Now, this is gonna be kind of funny. I want to talk about the Pok'eball Plus, but I've never used a Pok'eball Plus. And the only version I have is in this special edition Switch that I recently picked up for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And this always seemed like such just like a gimmick kind of thing. The whole thing with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is that, like, oh, you play the game with one Joy-Con. That's also one of the biggest detriments of the game. It's really strange because, like, you can play the game in handheld mode, and you don't have to deal with all the bullshit that you have to deal with playing the game on a TV screen. You have to only use motion control to catch your Pokemon. And because the game can be played in such a simple fashion with only one analog stick and button, they made a controller out of a Pokeball to just really be kind of cute, I guess. Oh, look at this guy, eh? Isn't that fun? All right, so, this is pretty putrid. Is it novel? Of course it is. This is kind of a funny little thing they got going on here. But my lord, I think, like, the main thing that really bugs me is the fact that the button up here that you click it's not the easiest thing in the world to click. This is not comfortable at all. It is 100% just kind of novel. The fact that like, oh man, it's like I'm actually throwing a Pokeball and you can throw it when you're trying to catch your Pokemon. The fact that, you know, the thumbstick is on the Pokeball itself, you know, like it is cute. You know, let's be fair here. I mean, like, it pretty much only works with, like, Pokemon Let's Go. It also works with Pokemon Sword and Shield, which I've never even seen anybody use this with that game. And you can use it as, like, a Pokemon Go Plus with Pokemon Go, so then you can use it to, you know, catch more Pokemon with your phone off. You know, sure, that's fine, but like, I don't want to put this in my damn pocket. It's gonna bulge out. Also, this is like pretty damn expensive for what it is. You know, just like a funny little controller to dick around with. That's what this is to me. It is kind of like an evolution of the Pokewalker from like Heart Gold and Soul Silver on the DS. But even then, I mean, like, that's more of a pedometer, if anything. This kind of has, like, similar functionality to that, as, you know, you can link it to Pokemon Go, but I don't know. This is, like, way more of just, like, a gimmick where it's, like, I don't know why you'd play the whole game like this. This just feels... this just feels uncomfortable. The DK Bongos for the GameCube? Why were these a thing past one game? This turned into like a full-blown extra platform Nintendo felt the need to support. You had the entire Donkey Konga series, 1, 2, and 3, only in Japan. Then you had Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which for some reason they thought like, damn, let's make an entire platformer where you use the DK Bongos. Okay. And then Donkey Kong Barrel Blast on the Wii was originally meant to be a GameCube game where you use the bongos to race. I have no idea why this was Donkey Kong's whole identity for a couple of years, and in addition to that, why Nintendo thought to try to make these bongos compatible with anything past the Donkey Konga series. Because these were simply meant to be just rhythm game peripherals. You know, Donkey Konga was developed by Namco, who also did the Taiko Drum Master series, and like, yeah, when you compare both of these games side by side, you can definitely see the similarities, especially when it comes to the accessory. You know, Taiko Drum Master, you're beating a drum. Donkey Konga, you're beating bongos. And yeah, to be honest, these are pretty damn limited in like functionality. You know, you have one button there, a microphone for clapping, and then your start button here. And yeah, pretty much any game that uses the DK Bongos pretty much amounts to this. I think they are an ingenious waste of time. You know, they're just so goofy, the fact that they exist, and the fact that not only they exist, but they've been supported past multiple games. Like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is like a AAA platformer developed in-house by Nintendo to make just I felt like it was just like a bet. Somebody made a bet. They were like, I bet you can't make a platformer to use these bongos. And they said like, yeah, fucking watch me. And Donkey Kong Jungle Beat is actually pretty good. So it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm the fool here. And the bongos definitely kind of make that game like interesting. You know, like as a platformer on its own, it's still pretty good. But like just the mere fact that you can play it with the DK bongos just makes that game like a feat, you know? Like, even if it wasn't that great, like, it's still like, god damn it, you did it. You made a platformer that used DK bongos as an input method. Like, everything about that game just kind of felt like Nintendo was just strutting their stuff, showing like, look what we can do, bitches. Gotta be honest though, I'm never really like yearning to use the DK bongos anymore. Honestly, just even doing that whole thing where I'm just jamming on it, like, my hands hurt, man. Honestly, the most interesting thing about the DK Bongos at this point is just how far they went, how much Nintendo actually supported them, and how much of a future they really saw with these bongos as an actual controller method. And the fact that they themed it after DK pretty much like locked them into making only Donkey Kong-based games surrounding these bongos, which is really weird to me that they would still like try to push it that much like years down the line. Like, they were looking to make a game in 2006 using these bongos on the GameCube, and it eventually went to the Wii, and it never used the bongos, but still. Bro, I don't fucking know. What do you want me to say about this? The Color TV Game 15. Technically, I think the first one Nintendo made was the Color TV Game 6, but this is like one of their first traditional home console type dealios. This is basically just a Pong console, just something to plug into the TV to play Pong-like games. But of course, we do have controllers. Yeah, that's what those are. I don't even feel like taking this whole thing out of the box because it's just like, what do you want me to say about this? It's a knob. Oh, baby, all the extra NES controllers. Well, firstly, here we have a revised NES controller. When Nintendo released the NES top loader, kind of like the NES redesign around the era of the Super Nintendo, where, you know, the NES would be super cheap that way, and, you know, they could kind of advertise it as kind of like, oh, baby's first game console, or just game console for those on a budget. It came bundled with this completely different NES controller, and yeah, it does solve a lot of the problems with the original. I mean, look how rounded this thing is. There's a reason why this thing is nicknamed the dog bone controller, because it is very much like a dog bone, but that's not a bad thing, because, like, damn, I mean, have you ever held a dog bone? It's comfortable. The D-pad is definitely a lot more comfortable to use than the original, and you also have, you know, nice defined start and select buttons, and pretty good B and A buttons. This is the big problem with this controller. I hate the fact that it's raised in this way because, like, I don't know, man. Like, what? You kind of have to use it like that. Of course, you can kind of make do with, you know, putting your thumb between them like that if you kind of want to, like, let's say in a Mario game, run with B and jump with A. It's a little awkward to do that. You know, at least with this, you know, I don't know. It just worked a lot better on this one. This almost gets there. It was nearly perfect, but, like, god damn, why did they have to angle it in this direction? Here I have the NES Max, which has a similar problem, even more so, because, like, it's higher up. Oh, god. But it has, like, this weird, like, cyclone circle pad-esque kind of design here. I don't really think I like this very much. A lot of people complained about, like, Nintendo thumb back then with how sharp the NES D-pad was. So I think this was kind of a way to mitigate that. You know, you can kind of just move it around very softly. You don't have to push down hard at all. You can just kind of move and, like, boom, it's registering as right. You also have turbo buttons, which every one of these, like, professional controllers has, just because, like, they got to put something on there to really get your money's worth. But I don't really care about the NES Max. I mean, look at this thing. It's just, it's wobbling all over the place. No, thank you. I'm all about the NES Advantage. Now, this one's cool. The fact that it's this beefy arcade stick. You have these giant buttons, this big-ass arcade stick. This is just kind of neat. It's obviously more of a novelty, if anything. I mean, like, come on, man. Why are you using that these days? The joystick is not nearly as good as just a regular D-pad, even for arcade games, because, like, this just doesn't feel nearly as tactile. It just kind of feels like, you know, if I go in this direction, is it actually going to register as, like, a down and left rather than just a straight up left? I don't know. You know, like, it's not the greatest thumbstick for me personally. The buttons are pretty cool. I like those. The slow-mo feature is just kind of like, who gives a shit? That's just to add a bonus feature to sound cool. But in reality, it's just pausing and unpausing the game constantly. And even then, most games, it doesn't even work well in, because, like, the pause screen, just, it doesn't function well with it. But as a cool little arcade stick kind of thing, I mean, this thing is beefy. This thing is substantial. I like the NES Advantage. I never use it. The Wii U Pro Controller. So, you know, the Wii U gamepad may be a bit unwieldy for some, and, you know, Nintendo decided to offer a more traditional gamepad alternative for the Wii U. And, you know, this does so many things right. So we haven't talked about the Wii Classic Controller and Classic Controller Pro yet, but this is a much more, like, legitimate controller than those. Those kind of felt like, you know, you're putting gum and paper clips together and making a controller out of them. They're good controllers, but, you know, like, they're very light. They're pretty much, they don't work unless you plug them in the Wii remote, all that stuff. This is a legitimate controller on its own. And the main reason I don't like it very much is just completely me being a little bitch. I don't like the thumbsticks being up here with a controller design like this. With the Wii U gamepad, I think it makes sense with that tablet form factor, having a slate, you know, something so big. I think having the thumbsticks up there works perfectly fine for that. For this, I don't know, man. It's just a little awkward for me. That's not to say this isn't a comfortable and good controller. This is a great controller overall. Just kind of depends if, you know, you can handle this. With a little bit of whiskey, I can handle anything. Especially for, like, 80 hours. This thing has, like, an incredible battery life, mainly because, like, There's like nothing going on in here. There's no motion control, no NFC, no camera, no nothing. So this is very much just like as basic controllers get. And because of that, its compatibility with Wii U games is a bit light. That's unlike the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, which has compatibility with like pretty much 99% of the entire library. The Wii U Pro controller, games you'd expect to support it just don't for some reason. It's really dumb. With that being said, I think this is a fair recommendation for Wii U owners. It's nice to have one of these on standby, and it's a solid controller. It is very Xbox 360-like. I mean, even the design of like the triggers here, it's pretty much identical to an Xbox 360 controller. But that's not a bad thing, because the 360 controller is quite damn good. But it does kind of make the Wii U Pro controller like a bit of identity outside of like, oh God, you stupid bastard. Which brings us to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, which kind of lacks even more identity because now it has the stick placement of an Xbox 360 controller. But my lord, this may be one of my favorite Nintendo controllers ever. The only major problem I have with it is the D-pad's a little yucky, but I can handle that because this is just, oh my God, it just feels so damn good. The buttons are exactly as I want them to be. They're very similar to the Wii U gamepad buttons. The sticks feel great. The shoulder buttons feel excellent. The grips, oh my God, this controller feels like oddly soft, but so damn lethal in your hands. Like, it's just like, oh my God. This is definitely up there. This may be my favorite Nintendo controller, which is crazy because this is from the same system whose standard controllers are, I'm not talking about these again. Does stuff like this count? Because if it does, we're gonna be here all fucking day. The NES Zapper, I like the click sound it makes. That's really fun. There's also the SNES Super Scope. That's too big to bring onto the carpet down here. I mean, at that point, what? Like the Wii balance board, does that count? I don't know. I mean, like there's so many things that can count as like controllers. And there's also a lot of like licensed controllers. Nintendo gave their blessing for a lot of controllers made by like PDP and Hori. And it's just like, you know, okay, like where are we gonna end things? Well, how about this? This disgusting ass Super Famicom controller and friends, because this isn't the last controller we'll talk about. Hey, I mean, this is slightly different from the SNES controller because we got colored buttons, and you know, these ones are not concave. To me, that makes it slightly worse, but I like the colored buttons. Of course, we do have the classic controllers on the Wii, and I do like these, but like I've already said, they are very hollow, just like, you know, you have to plug them into the Wii remote for them to do anything, and they don't work in a ton of games on the Wii. But, you know, during the Virtual Console era, when like you were playing more games on the Wii Shop channel, these were definitely a must. And for more traditional games on the Wii, you know, you got your Xenoblade Chronicles, GoldenEye 007, you know, these are great. And I do think they both serve different purposes. I mean, like, this is a great Super Nintendo controller alternative, whereas this is definitely much more of like, hey, if you actually need like a legitimate controller to plug into your Wii remote, you're good with this. There is the original Famicom controller, but strangely enough, I don't own a Famicom. I own 3 Famicom disk systems, so it's just like, you know, ask me why, sure, go for it. I'm not going to answer that because I don't know. I don't know why. The most interesting thing about the original Famicom controllers is that they're hardwired to the Famicom, and the second controller doesn't have a start and select button and instead has a microphone, which, you know, for example, is used in Zelda, and you'd scream at the Pulse voices, and that's how you'd kill them. And you know, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the entire lineage of Nintendo's controllers. And like I said, you know, like, if we define what the hell a controller is, we'll be here all day. I mean, I know I didn't show off the original GameCube controller compared to the Wavebird, but like, they're like the same thing. The Wavebird's just wireless and has a chunk sticking out. I didn't show the Wii Remote Plus, but again, it's the same thing. Some Wii Remotes have the sync button on the outside of the battery cover. It's the same fucking thing. And there's all these weird ones like the ASCII keyboard controller for the GameCube and whatnot. But again, those are more so like licensed creations. I just kind of wanted to go over all the mainline ones. And yeah, what a lineage. What a creepy ass lineage this was. But man, I wouldn't have it any other way, because like I said at the beginning, because Nintendo just goes all over the place, like that's what makes this fun. You know, it's not the same to discuss like the lineage of PlayStation controllers or Xbox controllers, because it's just not the same. You know, Nintendo does different things. Whether you like it or not, you gotta respect that. Except this, I don't mind if you don't respect this.